Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Kamla Ganesh, formerly from the Department of Sociology, University of Mumbai, and currently Senior Fellow of the Indian Council of Social Science Research. In the course on Sociology of the Indian Diaspora, we are now going to discuss definitions, concepts, and theoretical debates. The term diaspora has been used academically quite recently. It was only in the 1970s when the prevalent assimilation theory, which was supposed to be compatible with the then prevalent models of integration, started showing its limitations and fallibilities, that the search for a new term began. In the 80s, the term diaspora started being used to refer to a group of migrants who share ethnicity and history and who act as a collective with a special orientation to the homeland. The field of diaspora studies itself emerged in the 1990s. This was the time when the journal Diaspora, a journal of transnational studies, got inaugurated, and it is a convenient moment to mark the inauguration of the field itself. The field has been from the beginning beset with many debates, many discussions, and many revisiting of concepts. The objective of this module is to familiarize you with the field and the basic features of diaspora studies, to also discuss definitions, finally to track the major debates in the field. Despite the debate and critical evaluation, the term diaspora has been part of social science vocabulary for some decades now. At present, it is a buzzword and a very energetic field of knowledge. In particular, the exponential growth of international migration in the era of globalization, in which technological advances have diminished the significance of spatially anchored communities, have catalyzed several new phenomena as well as terms and concepts. We now try to distill the key terms, concepts, and theoretical debates. The first section deals with definitions and concepts taken together. The second section provides brief overviews of key debates in the field, through which we can understand underlying theoretical approaches. Inevitably, there is an overlap between the two sections. The term diaspora is derived from the Greek word spiro and was used specifically to refer to the scattering of the Jewish people if they were to disobey the will of God. Most early attempts at definition have tried to go beyond the Jewish parameter and include other groups that did not closely resemble the Jewish model of dispersion. This called for a more loose definition of the term, such as the one by Walker Connor in 1988. That defines diaspora as that segment of a people living outside the homeland. This broad definition allowed scholars to accommodate many other groups under the term diaspora. Inspired by Connor's definition and seeking to expand it further, William Safran listed out 6 characteristics that were to be used as an ideal type in defining diaspora. He said, the concept of diaspora should be applied to expatriate minority communities whose members share several of the following characteristics. 1. They or their ancestors have been dispersed from a specific original center or 2 or more peripheral or foreign regions. 2. Retain a collective memory, vision, or myth about their original homeland, its physical location, history, and achievements. 3. They believe that they are not and perhaps cannot be fully accepted by their host society and therefore feel partly alienated and insulated from it. 4. They regard their ancestral homeland as their true ideal home and as the place to which they or their descendants would or should eventually return when conditions are appropriate. 5. They believe that they should be collectively committed to the maintenance or restoration of their original homeland and to its safety and prosperity. And 6. They continue to relate personally or vicariously to that homeland in one way or another, and their ethno-communal consciousness and solidarity are importantly defined by the existence of such a relationship. While Cohen agreed with Safran's strategy, recognizing that no modern diaspora would satisfy all the listed criteria, he believed that it suffered some limitations. Firstly, he felt that there was an overemphasis on the diaspora's link to the homeland. Secondly, he thought it was important to move away from the Jewish prototype to include those dispersed by colonialism and those who migrated on their own volition, as well as those who sustained networks for trade and commerce. He believed that there was need to recognize the positive aspects of diaspora, such as its contribution to developing a cosmopolitan consciousness and the benefits of transnational existence for its members. One of the striking features of many diasporas are their internal diversities. Jairam demonstrates this in the case of the Indian diaspora. The diversities have many dimensions. They may arise from the context and nature of immigration. Whether people immigrated in the pre-colonial or post-colonial period would certainly result in differences, as would their situation at that time, whether they were convicts, indentured laborers, or free migrants. Diversities also reflect the socio-cultural diversities within the nation itself, the most obvious ones being regional and linguistic diversities, followed by class, occupation, caste, and religion. This plural nature of the Indian diaspora demonstrates that the notion of one nation, one diaspora simply does not hold true always. Then there are the complex diasporas. The internal diversities that exist within diasporas do not necessarily preclude a sense of belonging to a nation. For example, both in India and in the Indian diaspora, regional linguistic identities coexist with a pan-Indian identity. There are also similarities among diasporas from certain regions that extend beyond the national borders. As Werbner puts it, in such complex diasporas, people from a particular region share a rich material culture of consumption, both high culture and popular culture, and often a dominant religion, and this creates public arenas and economic channels for cooperation and communal enjoyment which cut across the national origins or religious beliefs of performers and participants. The South Asian diaspora is one example of such a complex diaspora. It includes people from countries of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. Then we come to the idea of double and triple diasporas. Diasporic journeys sometimes do not end with migration away from the homeland to a different destination. Due to a whole range of reasons, diasporas relocate sometimes once and then once again, forming what are termed double and triple diasporas. A striking example is that of Gujarati business and trade related migrants who went to East Africa in colonial times, relocated to UK following Idi Amin's hostile policies in the 1960s, and later in the 1980s and 90s they moved on to the US for better opportunities and prospects. Such instances become significant in discussions on homeland as relocations create multiple homelands for the younger generations. Another reality that strains at the limits of the classical definitions of diaspora is the new ethno-national groups that are either on the verge of becoming fully established, permanent, or are still in the early stages of development. These groups that are in the process of becoming, or those which hold the potential to become diasporas, have been called incipient diasporas. We now move on to some allied terms, definitions, and conceptual delineations. Diaspora and exile. Another term that is used to refer to people or groups forced to live outside of their homeland is exile. Like diaspora, the term exile is also associated with the Jewish experience. While the meaning of the term diaspora broadened with its popularity and use, the word exile did not share the same fate. It is still used to refer to banishment or forced migration. Exile relates explicitly to political persuasion and forced flight caused by a nation state than does diaspora. The other pair of terms is migration and diaspora. The two terms overlap, but it is important to realize that while all diasporas result from migration, all migration does not result in the formation of diasporas. On arrival into a new location, migrants do not automatically form a diaspora unless there already is an established diasporic community of co-ethnics which they can slide into. The characteristics of diasporas that distinguish them from migrants are a diasporic consciousness or collective identity that preserves elements of the homeland's cultural practices either intact or as time passes in hybrid forms. Secondly, they espouse a vocabulary of return that in practice takes the form of enduring and organized efforts to maintaining relations with co-ethnics elsewhere and with the homeland to which they usually do not return but retain an orientation towards through travel, remittances, cultural exchange, political lobbying, and so forth. Yet another pair of allied terms is diaspora and borderlands. While diasporas involve migrations across national borders, sometimes these migrations take place between neighboring countries across a single border that is shared by the homeland and the hostland. These migrations tend to be unique in that the opposite sides appear to be separated by arbitrary borders but joined by continuous movements of people, money, goods, and information by legal or illegal means. They share many overlaps with the concept of diaspora. Borderland is the more accurate term since it refers to a contiguous region divided by a specific geopolitical border. The border between India and Nepal is an example of borderland. Finally, we come to the relationship between diaspora and transnationalism. Diaspora conveys a sense of a community of migrants fixed in the space of the hostland with memories of homeland and a desire for return. A transnational community is one whose financial, personal, familiar activities and networks span more than one country. The relationship between the two has been much written about. For example, Feist elaborates thus: diaspora has been often used to denote religious or national groups living outside an imagined homeland, whereas transnationalism is often used both more narrowly to refer to migrants' durable ties across countries and more widely to capture not only communities but all sorts of social formations such as networks, groups, and organizations. To quote Vertovec, when actual exchanges of resources or information or marriages or visits take place across borders between members of a diaspora themselves or with people in the homeland, we can say these are transnational activities. To be transnational means to belong to two or more societies at the same time. At that moment, the diaspora functions as a transnational communities. When such exchanges do not take place, but people maintain identification with the homeland and co-ethnics elsewhere, there is only a diaspora, not transnationalism. The new interest in the transnational has also led to the development of a new field of study called transnational studies. This field is interested not only in studying cross-border phenomenon, but rather proposes a gaze that begins without borders, empirically examines the boundaries that emerge, and explores their relationship to unbound arenas and processes, according to Peggy Levitt. The intellectual foundations for transnational studies has been put by scholars in the following way: empirical transnationalism that takes transnational processes rather than bounded units as the subjects under study; methodological transnationalism that involves developing new methodologies to shed light on cross-border realities; theoretical transnationalism that work with existing theoretical frameworks and accounts to arrive at new interpretations and explanations; philosophical transnationalism that sees a transnational social world as being the reality; public transnationalism that creates spaces where innovative approach to social change can be conceived and realized. What is the relationship between diasporic consciousness and diasporic identity? Belonging to a diaspora entails fundamentally a consciousness of or emotional attachment to commonly purported origins and cultural attributes associated with them. Concerns for homeland developments and the plight of co-diaspora members in other parts of the world flow from this consciousness and emotional attachment. Let us briefly discuss the concepts that frame cultural interactions both in a diasporic and non-diasporic situation. Acculturation, assimilation, integration, each of these terms refer to processes that take place when different cultures interact. Though they are often used interchangeably and the differences between them are subtle, they do have distinct meanings. Acculturation is the most broad of the three and refers to the process by which one culture acquires or learns elements of another culture and makes them part of its own when the two come into contact. Assimilation, on the other hand, refers to the process by which minorities become part of the dominant culture by giving up their own culture and adopting that of the dominant culture. This has been explicated by the analogy of the melting pot in the US, where none of the constituent elements is supposed to retain a separate identity. In actual reality, this has not happened, and people do retain their ethnic, religious, linguistic, and other aspects of their cultural identity. The melting pot analogy has been replaced by the salad bowl, which is more popular in Canada. This process, which results in the formation of a new multicultural society where constituent groups retain their identity but become part of the mainstream, is referred to as integration. Another set of words in continuation of the earlier ones is creolization and hybridity. The idea of creolization centers around the cross-fertilization between interacting cultures. It is actually contrary to the idea of diaspora, which is more careful to preserve elements from the homeland culture without mixing. But the process of diasporization inevitably triggers some degree of creolization willy-nilly. In creolization, elements from the incoming culture are taken and creatively merged with existing elements, giving rise to fresh and new forms. It is most evident in popular culture, music, dance, theatre, language and literature. The Creoles spoken in the Caribbean are noteworthy in this regard. The second concept of hybridity is close to creolization, but it has come into prominence specifically vis-a-vis diasporization in the context of hostlands. Superseding the earlier descriptors like assimilation and integration, it is a more powerful explanation of the way diasporics interact with their host societies and the outcome of the cultural exchange at the moment of this interaction. It has been elaborated by influential authors like Paul Gilroy, Stuart Hall, James Clifford and Homi Bhabha as one of the characteristics of diasporas. The terms multiculturalism and citizenship are closely allied to that of diaspora. The concept of diaspora began to gain currency in the 1960s, prior to which immigrant groups were expected to lose their identity and get assimilated into the culture of their new society. By the 1970s, these theories and expectations proved to be false. It is in this context that the term multiculturalism emerged. There are two aspects here that Parikh distinguishes in the following way. The term multicultural refers on the one hand to the fact of cultural diversity. The term multiculturalism refers to a normative response to that fact. From the 1970s in the USA, many groups, beginning with the blacks and later extending to Puerto Ricans, Mexican Americans, native peoples, non-European immigrants and others, began to see their culture as a marker of their unique identity and sought recognition of this along with the right to maintain their cultural identity. Around the same time, Australia and Canada also started considering certain groups as unassimilable, which prompted the adoption of the term multicultural by these societies to describe themselves. Similar cases were observed in other societies as well, such as with the Turkish immigrants in Germany. However, even in societies that were multicultural in their makeup, such as Britain and France, there was strong resistance to the term. Yet, gradually, most of these countries have adopted some version of multiculturalism. After 9/11 and other incidents, multiculturalism has been critiqued from many angles. Multiculturalism and citizenship have often found themselves at loggerheads with each other. However, as Modood points out, the ideal of multicultural citizenship is a critique of the cultural assimilation traditionally demanded by nation-states of migrants and minorities, as well as that of liberal individualism that has no place for groups. Nevertheless, it is clearly grounded in and is a development out of the ideas of individual equality and democratic citizenship. It is a truism that migration from home and homeland do not usually mean severance of all ties with them. Depending on the distance travelled, the political and socio-economic conditions and the ability of the migrant to keep in touch, varied levels of diasporic orientation to the geographic homeland do exist. However, under the influence of the Jewish classical diasporic model, all conceptualizations and theorizations of diaspora give a central place to the homeland in the formation of diasporic consciousness and identity. Such foregrounding of the homeland came to be seen as problematic as new examples of a range of diasporas began surfacing. The homeland may be an imagined community that features prominently in the struggle to survive physically and emotionally in a new and strange location. In this sense, the desire to go back may be cast in the form of a myth of return, not a real plan of returning, but to keep its memory alive. But there are also cases of long-distance nationalism where the diaspora plays a concrete and major role in homeland politics and political causes. More recently, scholarly engagements complicate and nuance the concept of homeland without ignoring its significance. Three major and interrelated debates in the field have been taken up here very briefly for a discussion. The first is on whether diaspora in its classical form is at all a useful concept. As we have already seen in definitions of the term diaspora, there is a major debate on the usefulness of the classical definition. Seminal works by Stuart Hall and Paul Gilroy have questioned the ability of the classical theory to adequately accommodate the diverse experiences of many diaspora groups into the available framework. The argument is that the diaspora experience is defined not by essence or purity, but by the recognition of a necessary heterogeneity. It is pervaded by hybridity, a concept of identity which lives with and through, not despite difference. So, the move from rigid and narrow definitions to accommodate diversities has led to a broadening of criteria. But such universalization of diaspora paradoxically renders it meaningless. The pendulum seems to have swung from the narrow to the overbroad. As Brubaker pithily puts it, if everyone is diasporic, then no one is distinctively so. Another development in reconceptualizing diaspora is the emergence of a number of closely related terms, each with its own distinctiveness, which we discussed earlier. It may be best to think of diaspora not as the name of a fixed concept and social formation, but as a process of collective identification and form of identity marked by ever-changing differences that chart the shifting boundaries of certain communities hierarchically embedded as enclaves, with porous boundaries within other larger communities. Diasporicity manifests itself in relations of difference. The diasporic community sees itself as linked to but different from those among whom it has settled. Eventually, it also comes to see itself as powerfully linked to, but in some ways different from the people in the homeland as well. The second debate is on victimhood and its relationship with agency. Even though the condition of trauma and victimhood, which was part of the classic definition of diaspora, has been interrogated, and other migrations, voluntary in search of better opportunity, have been included as diasporas, some scholars like Tololian maintain that the nature of cultural production and political commitment of a victim diaspora is shaped by a distinct work of memory, commemoration and mourning, which is less prominent in other kinds of dispersions. One contemporary argument in favor of not overly distinguishing the two types of diasporas, victim and voluntary, is that the conditions of transnationalism currently prevailing enable victim diasporas also to rise out of victimhood and exhibit agency in various forms and measures. Even in the past, victimhood has never precluded agency. For example, Sri Lankan Tamils in exile in Europe and North America have in the last more than 3 decades transformed themselves from a traumatized refugee diaspora, escaping the violence and conflict of the homeland, into a successful transnational diaspora. They have made new lives for themselves and become spokespersons for their co-ethnics back in Sri Lanka and for the Tamil cause. There are other contemporary examples of victim diasporas exerting agency that compels us to relook at the category in all its complexity. The third debate is on the centrality and necessity of the homeland concept for a diaspora. The issue in the contemporary debate is not whether the concept of homeland is part of the idea of diaspora, because it is. Rather, it is to interrogate the excessive emphasis on the homeland as if this was the only significant factor that mattered in the constitution of diasporic identity. In earlier scholarship, homeland was seen as a fixed geographical territory to which migrants hoped to return eventually. A little later into the field, homeland and hostland were both brought into the picture. Diasporas were conceived of as being caught in the dynamic between homeland and hostland. It was as though they had no existence of their own. Now, a more complex and nuanced understanding of homeland is emerging. Scholars such as Bra have pointed out that home, as embodying homing desire, is part of the existential condition of all kinds of migrations and should not be confused with a specific geographical territory whose boundaries are politically drawn. Safran makes the point that return is maintained as an ideal with no real intention of returning. Clifford adds that the homeland idea is often oriented towards maintaining a sense of community in the hostland rather than an orientation towards any single territory. In an era of transnationalism and the sanction of dual or multiple citizenships in several countries, diasporics are increasingly comfortable about expressing dual affiliations. Moreover, with double and triple diasporas, multiple homelands are available as reference points for the second and third generation diasporics. This further complicates a simplistic understanding of homeland. In conclusion, we have looked at the emergence, shifts, transitions, and debates in the field of diaspora studies. We have looked at terms and concepts, their definitions, and their changing meanings. One of the characteristics of this field of diaspora studies is that it is very much linked, its own theories are very much linked to the unfolding and changing nature of reality. With globalization and transnationalism, the social and economic and political reality that most people find themselves in compels the field too to come up with renewed definitions and changed meanings. To paraphrase Dufour, the terms are after all only words, and words are used to denote one part of reality. Every time we use a word, we may not use it with the same meaning.